When you write an old school fantasy in a modern style, you get this book. Welcome to Mad on Books, where I talk about fantasy mostly, science fiction sometimes, and comics occasionally. Today's book is The Severing Sun, the debut novel of Vaughn Roycroft, published in 2022. Full disclosure, Vaughn is a friend of the channel. He watches my videos and comments on almost every one of them, which I really love. He always has something smart to say, and he sent me this book. In fact, he sent me this book twice. Apparently there was a printing error in the first one, and he graciously just sent me the second one, both of them for free. I'm going to give you an honest review, but as you know, probably if you've seen any of my videos, I don't really dig negative videos, so I don't do them. If I don't like a book, I don't do a review. So if this is a review of a book, you know I like it. So where do we always start? We start with what it's got. A chosen one, a prophecy, an all-female warrior clan, invading savages, snappy fight scenes, short chapters, pretty explicit sexy time, a love triangle, coming of age, a prologue with a clear connection to the story, family issues, a reluctant hero, tribal politicking, betrayal, and clear good and bad guys. Like I said in the intro, this is an old school fantasy in so far as how the story goes and the kinds of things it contains, but it's much more of a modern fantasy story in the way that it's written. It's got pretty snappy prose. It's not overly bogged down in descriptions, and it's got a lot of more modern ways of describing things. It's almost something I would call a historical fantasy. It's very clearly, a lot of the aspects of it are inspired by actual historical tribes and nations, and I guess even possibly landscape and that kind of thing. And it doesn't really have a huge component of magic in it for fantasy. There are prophecies, there are dreams that are prophetic, and there are gods hinted at being maybe real, but there's no full-on magic pretty much at all. So the story is told in a third-person limited with multi-POVs. This is something in fantasy that we're super used to. It seems to be sort of the default writing style or framing perspective in most fantasy books today. The main characters are Vaughn. Vaughn is the son of a banished chieftain, and Elan, who is a blade wielder of the all-female warrior clan that I mentioned. There is a valley, which is primarily the home of two huge clans, the Lions and the Wolves, and they have an uneasy alliance. And Vaughn is the son of the leader of the Lion clan, who was banished under shady circumstances and comes back just as the valley is being invaded by a savage clan from elsewhere. And Elan and the warrior clan try and protect him to help fulfill the prophecy, which they believe includes him in a very important role. That's the high level, no spoilers kind of idea of the story. It's, like I said, it's a world with no real magic. There are certainly no mages casting fireballs or anything. There is a woman who seems to be, in already the first chapter, I believe, seems to be maybe possessed by a goddess. But all of those things could maybe be explained in other ways as well. So it's a very feet on the ground kind of fantasy. And like I said, I've actually heard Vaughn talk about this. He said that, certain tribes were very clearly inspired by historical tribes. And as the story expands and goes out into other areas, there are other tribes and other geographic things that are all inspired by actual history. One of the other really cool things that it's got is a quote and recommendation by Philip Chase, our friend Philip Chase. So he says, action-hungry readers of such authors as John Gwynne, George R.R. Martin, and Evan Winter will love it. There are a number of fight scenes. There is a very, very cool duel in the middle. There are a number of quite large battles. It's not only battle. It's really interesting. It seems like I was kind of expecting it to be an all battle all the time kind of thing. And there are a couple of pretty epic battles in it, but it's a lot of character as well. Vaughn focuses quite well and quite interestingly on the characters. I said in the beginning that there's a love triangle. Normally that would be a reason for me to not read a book. It's a trope that if it's done really badly is really, really bad. The one in this one is actually, I think, done quite subtly. It's not overbearing, and you don't feel like anyone's being an idiot constantly. So that is certainly not something to not recommend the book for. It's a book that has a lot to do with, as far as themes, has a lot to do with family, certainly. Not necessarily so much blood family, but the people you belong to, whoever they are. There are characters that are questioning whether they should go off and do something and leave their tribe and enter into a world that they don't know at all, and also be essentially banished. There are characters who are looking back to their parents who are gone, trying to live up to their dead parents' expectations and other people's expectations because of who their parents were. There's a very clear father-son theme with the main character Vaughn. His father was a semi-legendary figure in his tribe, and he's trying to live up to that and coming slowly maybe to understand his father, who he didn't understand very well at the beginning of the story, and they didn't have such a positive relationship necessarily. Of course, it's a book with prophecies, and the prophecies is a pretty important part of it. So destiny and how much you can steer your own future, and how much of it is maybe predetermined, or how much a prophecy will actually predetermine for you how the rest of your life goes. But it has a lot to do with belonging, found family, clans, behaving in society, the things that your clan or the society culture you belong to might expect from you, even though you want something different or you need to do something different, and all of the rules and taboos and what's forbidden and that kind of thing comes up quite often. The really good things that I liked about it, I like old school fantasy, and it had a very old school feeling. Like I said, the language is not old school. It doesn't feel like somebody wrote it in the 1920s or something, not at all. But the relatively straightforward good bad, there are some characters, you hear about them for a paragraph, you know that they're the bad guys. There are other people who are the good guys. But that is actually quite satisfying sometimes. A lot of the things I read are maybe quite complex, and you have to think about it, and you have to question things a lot, and they get quite philosophical, and that's fine, but it's nice to read something that's just a good adventure with cool characters doing interesting and epic things. It's also, I found, really well paced. I didn't feel like any of it was really slow. There are a number of periods where characters come together, there's politicking, intrigue, people talking, but it still engaged me. So I enjoyed it. And I really liked the characters. I thought the characters were quite well developed. And even though this is only the first book in a trilogy, I already felt there was a lot of character development going on. Vaughn, for example, starts as a pretty young and isolated and naive kid. who's got a number of emotional issues with his father and his family and his role in the world. And he definitely learns and develops already through this first book. A couple of things that were maybe a bit less good, not really bad, but less good, because it's a book with POV switching. It felt like Vaughn hadn't quite found the balance of that. This is a feeling I also had about Malice by John Gwynne, that there were some characters, just because they were the POV the most, they felt like main characters. And then there were other characters whose POVs we got, but we got them so rarely that when we switched over to one of those characters, I was like, I don't know who this is. I don't remember how they fit in or connect to other things. And it was just a little moment of confusion. Not dramatic, absolutely not a deal breaker, but something that was maybe a little bit bumpy. The sex scenes, I think there's only 3. And let me preface this by saying I'm super sex positive. I have no problem with sex appearing in books, but sometimes it felt a little soft porn-ish, like pretty explicit writing. And I kept, every time it happened, it just sort of stunned me a little bit. Not because I have a problem with sex, but just because it felt like it didn't really belong somehow. It got kind of raunchy and explicit in a way that didn't really seem to fit the rest of the story, at least for me. And also maybe one of the things, I'll say this in a non-spoiler way, but there is a love triangle, but it was never really in doubt who was going to end up together. Partially just because of how the POV chapters are distributed. It was pretty clear, like, if you've got 3 people in a love triangle and 2 of them have POV chapters all the time and one of them almost never, yeah. But none of those things were enough to make me put it down. And all of the good things about it were enough to make me fly through it. I think I read it in 3 days without any problem. It's not crazy thick, as you can see. It looks bigger than it is. It's also generously typeset. So, but in the end, it's only 500 pages and generously typeset. So it's a good read. Let's have a look at the cover. One of the things I really like about this cover, I've said it before when I talk about covers, is the artwork is wraparound. Yes, publishers, self-publishers, do this, it's good. I really like this artwork. It's more on the illustrative rather than the atmospheric side of the scale. It's showing us a whole bunch of people obviously ready for war. Everybody's armed. There are lots of spears. There are a number of women on horses, which made me curious the first time I saw it and knew nothing about the book. But considering that an all-female warrior clan is a really big part of the book, I thought totally illustrates quite well the idea. The interesting thing is the title, The Severing Sun, is basically referring to Valdan. And I don't really see anyone I would describe as Valdan on the cover. But it's also got a vague, sort of not extremely detailed style, which I always find helps me imagine. It gives me a lot of space to imagine. It doesn't put all of the details exactly the way the artist thinks they should be or the author thinks they should be. It gives me room to interpret in my own imagination. The typography, honestly, is nothing special. There's a technique they've used here, which I honestly don't like very much. The title has a bit of shadow behind it. What that does is it immediately takes all of the dimension out of the artwork behind it. And the artwork, the dimensionality should be there because like it's got a real strong foreground, it's got a middle ground, and it's got a background. So that is all suggesting depth. But as soon as you put something flat with a shadow on top of it, then it looks like a painting. It doesn't have a feeling of depth. It looks like a two-dimensional background. So I'm not crazy about that. The typography itself, the typeface, is nothing special. It doesn't really add much to the cover. I really like the background artwork. Let me just quickly give credit where credit is due. The image was done by John Anthony Di Giovanni, and the graphics, I suppose the layout of the front cover was done by 3 Star Smoked Fish Company, which makes me really curious to ask Vaughn if it is actually a smoked fish company or if that is just a funny name for a design studio. Anyway, I would definitely recommend this. I don't really do ratings, but I guess I would probably go like 4.5 stars, 4 stars, 4.5 on something like this. If I did do ratings, but I don't. Yeah, I am really looking forward to seeing what else he comes out with. This is the first book in a trilogy, which is called the Sundered Nation trilogy. And the next book is going to be called Bold Ascension. So I am totally on board for the second book, and I'm looking forward to it. Have you read Vaughn's book? If you have, let me know what you think of it down in the comments. I really enjoyed it. I hope that a lot of people read it. I hope that Vaughn has a lot of success with it. And as always, I hope you will. Keep reading awesome books, and I'll see you next time.